Namah Shri Yatirajaya Vivekananda Sure Satchit Sukhaswarupaya Swami Tapaharine. So we were talking about this lecture of Vivekananda, God in Everything, and we had concluded the discussion last time by this statement. What is a demoniacal world? The Vedanta says ignorance. This is where we had ended the discussion last time. So we proceed now and with this discussion a little further. So I'll read out, because first I think he's going to raise an issue about a fairly pragmatic problem that assails us, and then he is going to give the resolution. If you want to move around, I think this is not the right time. We are dying of thirst sitting on the banks of the mightiest river. We are dying of hunger sitting near heaps of food. Here is the blissful universe, yet we do not find it. We are in it all the time, and we are always mistaking it. Religion proposes to find this out for us. The longing for this blissful universe is in all hearts. It has been the search of all nations. It is the one goal of religion, and this ideal is expressed in various languages in different religions. It is only the difference of language that makes all these apparent divergences. One expresses a thought in one way, another a little differently. Yet perhaps each is meaning exactly what the other is expressing in a different language. So herein, the summary that is being given is, so first he says that there is this bliss if we but seek it, if we but notice it, if we but register it. And then he basically says that this longing for joy or bliss is really the could you please hold the children with you? It's very disturbing otherwise, yeah? Okay, so here's the basic point. So the first thing that he asserts here is that there is this source of bliss around if we but seek it. However, if we look at our day-to-day lives, that is not our empirical experience. I mean, there's a lot of trouble, disturbance, sorrows, etc. in our personal lives. And the Vedanta basically says that the cause of this is this lack of awareness, which is what we call ignorance, right? On the other hand, in some form or the other, all organized religions across the world basically say that this aspiration for bliss, for joy, for satisfaction that is there in human hearts is not something that is merely an abstraction. It's not something that cannot be obtained, but there is but it is very real, and it is what actually inspires human beings towards all their higher pursuits. And they basically propose a way towards that. Yeah? And so this is basically one aspect of what he has said now. The other thing is basically saying that these different organized religions phrase it in different languages, and particularly when the language becomes concretized, it takes the shape of what we call ideology, and then people who essentially grant greater importance to the ideology than the content, greater importance to the words than the content, आप उनको बिठा लीजिए या तो आप पीछे जाके बैठ जाइए, ठीक है? नहीं, उनको ये बच्ची है, उसको समझ में नहीं आ रहा है, आपको तो समझ में आना चाहिए ना. So the other point that he raises here is that these various religions, when they essentially value the words or the covering or the packaging of the core idea differently, it becomes concretized often. And when people start giving this covering, way one dresses, way one speaks, what rituals one follows, instead of giving the intent, the actual substance of it, greater importance, what happens is that there is conflict between people, essentially converting this core pursuit of bliss, of joy, of truth in its purest form. It converts it into an organized form where one group conflicts with another group of people. This is really the cause for conflict between religions. It's not there. It only arises when the core intent is forgotten and the covering, which is basically a bunch of words, lifeless in itself, is given greater importance. This becomes clearer from the Vedantic point of view, where the idea that is put forward is that the essential aspect of our being that we give value to is the conscious principle, not the unconscious principle. On the other hand, we as embodied beings are a combination. The Vedanta calls it adhyasa, which is perhaps best translated as confusion, between the conscious principle and the unconscious principle. The aspect of ourselves through which we gain knowledge of the world around us, that aspect of us is exactly the conscious principle. But the object of which we gain knowledge is exactly what the unconscious principle is about. The words, therefore, just written down, say on paper or spoken, that in itself is not something that is an aspect of the conscious principle, especially when it is devoid of, or when it is bereft of, the content that it signifies. The key here, the mystery here is hidden in this word signifies. Meaningfulness, significance, value, these are all in some sense intertranslatable. And what is it that gives value? It is exactly the conscious principle. On the other hand, if we take upon ourselves the more superficial idea that the words in which something is communicated, the particular ritual that one performs, the way one dresses, the food one eats, etc., and so forth, this superficial aspect of things, once we start taking this to be more important, what we are doing, in fact, is emphasizing the unconscious principle over the conscious principle. In other words, what we are doing is moving away from the content, the intent of all religious striving, all spiritual aspiration. I think I've told you this before, that today if you look at the world's demographics, then the third largest group of people basically say that they are spiritual, they do not subscribe to any organized religion whatsoever. Why is this the case? It's basically because the idea that organized religions have been trying to convey is that you have to follow one specific Procrustean paths, which means there is a certain bunch of doctrines which become in course of time lifeless dogmas, and then when you see people behaving in a different way, you automatically conclude that no, these are people who cannot possibly belong to something which is a religious aspiration. Instead of seeking certain universal human values which are there in every human heart, we try to seek them in particular doctrines, particular dogmas, particular organized religions. This way, and where does it boil down to? It basically boils down to speaking of the same truths or trying to address the same truths, but using different languages, using different practices. It's precisely this emphasis on the more superficial aspects that gives rise to conflict between religion and religion. This statement of Sri Ramakrishna, which we have right outside, Yatomat Tatopat, as many opinions or ideas, that many paths, is actually something which is to be treated as a counter to this kind of violent behavior or intolerant behavior between one group of people subscribing to one organized religion and another. This is really what it is, and let me re-emphasize, read from Vivekananda again, it is only the difference of language that makes all these apparent divergences. One expresses a thought in one way, another a little differently, yet perhaps each is meaning exactly what the other is expressing in a different language. All right. Now he comes to a different issue, which is much deeper. I think at a certain rational level at least, we all understand that this conflict between religions, etc., between atheism, agnosticism, theism, this religion, that religion, etc., each trying to prove itself superior, etc. At a certain level, it's a frivolous pursuit. It is not. If we are basically asked to introspect a little bit, we immediately understand that it is something that is of no real value, or rather superficial, which means as soon as our attention is drawn to it, at least rationally, it is not hard to understand that we are giving value to something that is much more superficial than the core intent of all religions. That part is clear. But he brings us now to a more important issue, which is basically this, that all right, we hear all these elevated things, but what about in practice? As soon as we are faced with trials and tribulations in our practical life, in our pragmatic life, as soon as we start dealing with the world, all our subjective convictions go for a toss. How are we going to address it? So he states the problem first, and then basically says that the solution is to keep at it. Yeah? So let's state the problem first, the way he says it. More questions arise in connection with this. It is very easy to talk. From my childhood, I have heard of seeing God everywhere and in everything. And then I can really enjoy the world. But as soon as I mix with the world and get a few blows from it, the idea vanishes. I am walking in the street thinking that God is in every man, and a strong man comes along and gives me a push, and I fall flat on the footpath. Then I rise up quickly with clenched fist. The blood has rushed to my head, and the reflection goes. Immediately, I have become mad. Mad meaning what? Essentially, the rational faculty, the discriminatory analytical faculty which keeps a check on unbridled emotions, that check is gone for the moment. We have essentially descended to the level of our instincts. The blood has rushed to my head and the reflection goes. Immediately, I have become mad. Everything is forgotten. Instead of encountering God, I see the devil. Ever since we were born, we have been told to see God in all. Every religion teaches that. See God in everything and everywhere. Do you not remember in the New Testament how Christ says so? We have all been taught that. But it is when we come to the practical side that the difficulty begins. The difficulty of carrying these ideas into practice begin. Why? Essentially because we have heard these ideas, but we treat them as abstractions, as nice things to hear, as nice things to say, but not carry them out in practice. I can narrate one particular incident here. This is something I have seen with my own eyes, and therefore it's important that I share it with you. One of our very senior respected monks of our order, I had the good fortune to join this organization under him. There was some disturbance going on at one of our centers, some school, there was some administrative problem going on, and we had just joined as young novices. So our monk in charge had told us to go and teach these classes instead of the people who were there, the regular teachers who were basically having a strike. So when we went there, the person who was in charge of this, essentially some kind of a leader of these people who were agitating, essentially came up and shook his fist in the face of this very senior monk. So I remember one of the people who had gone with us, who was furious at this and tried to counter this person who was the union leader, saying that, do you have any idea who you're talking to? At that moment, I saw the face of this senior monk. It was completely calm, more calm than he normally is. And he quietly pushed his attendant aside and said very peacefully, let him have his say. Let him say what he has to say. And this other person went on behaving in a very insulting fashion, but I saw, and it's left an impression, this is how many years back, from 98, 26 years back, is when I saw this. Face completely calm, just pushes this other person aside, says, let him say what he has to say. Face completely calm, no emotion, no trace of any emotional disturbance. It's as if the person had completely withdrawn and was just looking at the situation as a witness. There was no I who should react. Yes, it's what has happened is, so what we are trying to say is that, yes, it is true that in our day-to-day behavior, a person misbehaves, and there is this instinct in us which prompts us to react at once. But if we start even cultivating this attitude of detachment, basically looking after our own minds, it's what is called alertness or mindfulness or presence of God or paying full attention to anything what does. It's basically, these are interchangeable things. One is a Christian way of saying it, one is the Buddhist way of saying it, one is a Vedantic way of saying it, particularly Vivekananda's way of saying it. But it is this practice on a regular basis that essentially instills in us this capacity to treat adverse situations with equanimity. What Vivekananda is talking about here is that instinctively, which means without training, very often, as soon as an adverse situation arises, our reaction to that is in terms of either anger or hatred or fear. Why? Because it's instinctive. We've discussed it here in purely scientific terms. Anger, hatred, fear, etc., etc. These are instinctive reactions that were necessary during our evolutionary past. If we hear a rustle in the forest, the instinctive reaction is to run away from that source, and we call it fear today in society. In a jungle, there isn't time to analyze what is going on, whether there is really a tiger or a fierce animal or not. There's a definite risk of one's being eaten up or destroyed or killed. So that's why these reactions which instantly catch hold of us and prompt us to action. On the other hand, we have been living in a society as human beings for maybe close to 10,000 years or maybe more, in some rudimentary society from even before that. Do we really need those reactions? This self-introspection analysis is what allows us to treat certain instinctive reactions as no longer necessary. And when one treats these emotions, fear, anger, hatred, with this level of analysis and introspection, these start decreasing their hold on our psyche. So part of it is really this instinctive leftover, this leftover of evolution, so to speak. So he cites a story, very colorful story from the Aesop's fables, Greek Aesop's fables. Yeah, you all remember how in Aesop, maybe Egyptian. Yeah, you all remember how in Aesop's fables, a fine stag is looking at his form reflected in a lake and is saying to his young one, "How powerful I am! Look at my splendid head. Look at my limbs, how strong and muscular they are, and how swiftly I can run." In the meantime, he hears the barking of dogs in the distance and immediately takes to his heels. And after he has run several miles, he comes back panting. The young one says, "You just told me how strong you were. How was it that when the dog barked, you ran away?" "Yes, my son, but when the dogs bark, all my confidence vanishes." Such is this is the story. And then he says, such is the case with us. We think highly of humanity. We feel ourselves strong and valiant. We make grand resolves. But when the dogs of trial and temptation bark, we are like the stag in the fable. This is our practical situation. Though we have ideas which far surpass what can be carried out in practice, our empirical behavior does not reflect it. We have laudable ideals, basically driven by this instinct, this inner core in us which values a certain unity amongst individuals. That's what leads us to think in our calmer moments highly of humanity. But what happens when we face trials? All that unity, all that sense of this conflict between people is a pointless thing. It all vanishes. And what takes its place is again these three: anger, fear, hatred, etc. Essentially, our instincts catch hold of us. These are given names. They are called samskaras, etc., etc., habits, innate tendencies. And the other is called viveka, or analytical thing. In some sense, it's a conflict between the instinctive mind which behaves without thinking and the deeper mind which is committed to larger human values. It's that conflict that is being talked about. But if this be the practical situation, that in the face of trials and tribulations, we instinctively choose the lesser option of behaving as if we are in the throes of anger, fear, hatred. If this is the pragmatic situation, what are we to do? This is the question he poses. This is a problem that all of us face. We have a certain ideal, a subjective ideal, but when it comes to a practical situation which is testing, we find that very often we cannot live up to that ideal. And the question arises, what's the point of such an ideal in that case? That's the question he raises here. Then, if such is the case, what is the use of teaching all these things? And he answers, there is the greatest use. The use is this, that perseverance will finally conquer. Nothing can be done in a day. And this is something that is reflected again in all these religious injunctions, descriptions, both analytical and injunctive. What is it? It basically says that, look, there are these habits that are there in us. So what is the way to conquer bad habits? Basically to cultivate good ones, worthwhile ones, which basically say that these bad habits which trouble us, if they are cause of habits, if we have, essentially, this is really the thing. One thing that he says in a different place is essentially taking the full responsibility on one's shoulders. Instead of trying to shirk it and trying to say, oh, society is so bad, it is making me behave in such and such a way. Instead of that, look, this is the situation that I am in, and the only thing that I have in my hands which I can change is my reaction to the situation. In other words, I have certain habits, in Sanskrit called samskaras. What can I do? I can change them. I can change them not overnight, but by regular practice. Abhyasa vairagya abhyam. Yeah? Through practice and dispassion, which means understanding that these instinctive reactions cause us harm. Once that understanding becomes deep, who would like to cause harm to himself or herself? It's only because we somehow or the other justify these habits to ourselves, intellectually or emotionally, that they continue to have a hold on us. This analytical faculty tries to expose the harm that these cause to us, the pain that they cause to us, this suffering, and essentially tells the mind, look, this is your reaction, This is the pain that you cause yourself by reacting this way. This holding that reaction firmly in one's field of vision. This is called awareness. This is called mindfulness. This is called paying full attention to what are the things that one's mind is doing. Once that awareness starts developing, what happens is that one starts understanding that this psyche, which is some kind of an inert thing, it starts dawning on that psyche, on the stupid part of our mind, that these things that we do cause us harm. Who would consciously keep on pricking oneself even when it causes pain? Nobody. Without any purpose. So then one starts saying that, oh, these things that we are doing to ourselves are basically inflicting pinpricks on ourselves. What's the point? That's the negative part of it. This is what gives rise to dispassion or moving away from habits that cause us harm. Next, cultivating the positive replacement. See, just a dispassion towards negative emotions is not good enough, because the mind cannot live in a vacuum. It must be anchored in something more positive, which means, why is the mind running after all these things, this anger, fear, hatred, etc., etc.? See, imagine somebody in a forest and there was this animal which was lurking in the background, or at least there was this fear that there was some animal lurking in the background. The person runs away, comes to some safe place. What happens? There is a satisfaction, there is a sense of satisfaction that I have saved myself from ruin. It's an instinctive reaction that leads us to these actions. To these actions because of fear of certain things. But when the mind starts becoming convinced that there really is nothing to fear, then what has happened? That, oh, I ran pointlessly, I unnecessarily exhausted myself, I went through this emotional turmoil for nothing. In the first situation, the emotional turmoil and the exhaustion was of value, because it was to prevent a greater pain, namely self-destruction. That was avoided. Hence, the mind said, okay, despite the fact that I have gone through all this emotional turmoil, through this physical exhaustion, I have actually extracted something of value, namely my personal survival. This is putting in words, rationally, what that instinct, what purpose that instinct served. But today, in our behavior, when there is this emotional exhaustion or physical exhaustion, what has happened? We have gone through an unpleasant experience inwardly, or even maybe physically, without gaining anything. Which means now what is gained is only this exhaustion, only this physical tiredness, emotional turmoil. And it does not leave us equipped for our own work, for our own higher work. So, what used to be an advantage at some stage has turned out to be a disadvantage once we are social creatures. The more clearly and rationally this is understood, the more it becomes a deeper conviction. And the deeper the conviction, the easier it is to let go of this other thing. But what is the positive of it? That is hidden in this discussion. We are now social creatures. We are part of this larger group of people that we call humanity. And there are certain common goals that the people have set. And to seek that satisfaction, that universality, We do not need to actually indulge in this kind of fear-mongering, etc., etc. In this kind of filling our minds and hearts with hatred and anger unnecessarily. Essentially, what happens, for example, I don't think this is something that is just relevant to years past. In today's society, there is this social media where people spew out whatever they like. Lot of it is just plain propaganda, not based on fact. One person voicing his or her fear and anger. And very often, there is an ulterior motive that I should not be the only person who is afraid, I should not be the only person who is angry. I want other people to share my anger and fear. What will that do? That will make my anger and fear stronger. There is this such and such group of people or such and such person I am afraid of, I am angry with, and I don't have the strength to go and assault such a person. Therefore, get enough people on board so that we can go along together and teach that person or that group of people a lesson. And this is something that is going on in this social media. It has brought the whole world together in a small thing without having a corresponding test of truth against each of these fatuous statements that are made. Therein lies an opportunity for this discrimination in very pragmatic, practical terms. When something that we read or hear evokes this anger, fear, hatred, what is our instinctive reaction? Has it fed our prejudices? Has it created has it immediately, without our minds analyzing it, has it strengthened our fear, anger, hatred? If so, then we need to look back upon ourselves and understand that what has happened at that stage is that this viveka, analytical, discriminatory buddhi committed to truth, has been suppressed. What has taken its place is a viveka, which is what exactly moha is. Essentially, we have gone back to our instinctive physical ways. We have gone back to the instinctive animal life that we are trying to get out of. And if, on the other hand, this analytical thinking kicks in even a little bit, swalpam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. Yeah, this is Bhagavad Gita. Swalpam api asya dharmasya trayate mahato bhayat. They don't identify anything else. Fear. Vivekananda says, fear is the root of all evil. What happens? A little bit of practice, an instinct comes up. And if we trace it down, we feel that the final, most powerful one is this fear of self-destruction. Causes anger, causes hatred, causes everything. That has actually encroached on our psyche, even spontaneously identifying that. What we see is that, oh, this instinct is rising, it has caught me unawares. This little stepping back. What has happened is that the mind has been alert, and at that moment it has caught hold of this instinct of fear. As soon as one becomes aware, what has happened? See, essentially, this is what in one of Sri Ramakrishna's parables he talks about it. There was this guy who has put on a mask of a bear and a bear skin, and has come along and is trying to frighten some children. And one of the more intelligent children says, "Oh, this is so and so." As soon as it is recognized, what is being recognized? Oh, it is this mask of fear in terms of words, in terms of propaganda, in terms of prejudice, in terms of all these things. It is this mask which is contentless. That is creating and instilling this fear. Even a slight awareness of it, what does it do? It rips away the mask and shows this thing that has been evoking fear, anger, hatred in us to be empty of substance. Suppose somebody comes along and starts abusing me in Swahili. Yeah, I don't know Swahili. So if somebody starts abusing me in Swahili, will I react? No. Because I don't see what is the content behind that language. I can see that this person is agitated. I'll have no idea why that person is agitated. The same way, if somebody starts behaving with me in a certain way, and I treat it as something that is just a bunch of words, which means what? We have in our mind separated out the covering, the words, the actions, etc., from the content which is of value. And once that separation is done, then the impact that it has on our psyche immediately starts waning. This is what practice is about. It's not something, as he says, there is the greatest use. The use is this, that perseverance will finally conquer. In a different place, somebody says, see, when you have a little calf just after it's born, it can't stand up on its own 4 legs. But then, with practice, what happens? It can even run on those legs. So what has happened is that these 4 legs of our mind, which should have been trained with strength, those are feeble. This clear analytical thinking, this truth seeking is suppressed, and that's why we have this, what is popularly called the WhatsApp university today. All kinds of things are spread around in social media, in WhatsApp, and we take that as the gospel truth. Why? Because if a certain phraseology is repeated ad infinitum, ad nauseum, our brains are actually configured that way. If the same signal is sent along our neuronal pathways, and we have reacted in a particular way to that, this something happening a number of times, it only strengthens that connection. So what's the solution? Weaken that connection. Develop different connections. That's it. So if it gives rise, the same thing, same expression can give rise to thinking along one particular way, but if we exercise our discrimination, what will happen is that the mind becomes stronger and treats the same stimulus as an occasion for doing greater mental exercise. There is this, I'll conclude with this story, which probably many of you know. There was this great disciple of Buddha who was called Angulimala. He was supposed to be a vicious person in early life. He had killed some 99 people and had wore their little fingers in a garland around his neck. And the Buddha was walking towards the place where he stayed. And people warned him. And he said, no, that's okay. I know how to handle such creatures. Went there, and this person came to him and was behaving very viciously. But Buddha's remained completely calm with no reaction. And this person says, how is it that you're not reacting? He says, well, when you throw a stone and if it does not hit a wall, then what happens? Well, no, it goes and falls away. So therefore, it's unless the something has received the impact of those stones, the stone fails to have effect. He says, the same thing. You have used your vicious thing. I have not accepted them. Things have been thrown at the person. He has completely ignored, which means this accepting is basically our reaction. Not reacting is not accepting the stimulus to be of any value. It's basically treating that vicious behavior like a person talking in Swahili when one has no idea what the language is about. Yeah? This is what it is. It's essentially a mind that is completely under one's control in terms of how it will react to external circumstances. And the solution, how to cultivate that, the practice is take the external circumstances and look at it deeply with full attention. Then it starts dissolving into its constituents and starts losing the value that we had imparted to it by our own volition. Thine alone is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. When seas lament, let go thy hold. Sannyasin bold. Say Om Tat Sat. This is from Vivekananda's song of the Sannyasi. Yeah? Let go thy hold. Yeah? Thine alone is the hand that holds the rope that drags thee on. It means we ourselves have basically responsible for the reactions that we give out to the world. It's this understanding. The more it dawns, the clearer our mind becomes. Okay, we'll return to this next week. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.